He just can't seem to stay away, can he, folks? We're going back to Sonic the Hedgehog again today to continue from where the last story left off. But weirdly enough, Penders actually comes back to the book to continue the story that he started 2 issues back in a different book, rather than having another writer take up the issue. Ken actually gets to continue the story that he started, which, given the flip-flopping we've had on the book when it comes to the writers as of late, is actually kind of surprising to me. I might not like Ken much as a writer, or an artist, or given what I've seen of him on social media, a person either, but at the very least, they let him continue an arc that he started, so there is some actual consistency to it, even if it is consistently mediocre and confusing. The cover is really cool. We have Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and the new character introduced at the end of the last issue, floating in a void, while some sort of mechanical monstrosity looms over them in the background. While I really do like the look of the cover, and our 4 main characters are easy enough to distinguish, the metal being in the background isn't quite as easy to discern. It's the main villain we'll be introduced to in this issue, but actually telling that it's his palm in the center there, and his face in the upper right was something that I didn't put together until after I'd read the issue. It's beautifully detailed, but the detail sort of bleeds into itself to the point where it can be hard to discern at points. The story opens in the dungeon cells, where Ynar, Sonic, and Tails are chained down. Before they can even properly introduce themselves, however, a couple of roboticized guards walk in and unchain Tails, saying that the sheriff wants to interrogate him. Sonic attempts to attack them, but he's chained to the wall by his arms, so he doesn't really have much of a reach at the time. Back with Knuckles, he's attacked by the figure in the trees, who I guess decided that shooting him wouldn't be worth the trouble and attacks him straight away with his bow, introducing himself as the King of the Deepwood Forest, Robbo the Hedge. If you haven't figured it out yet, we're doing a Robin Hood parody now, even down to Knuckles knocking Rob into the water while fighting on a fallen tree bridge, mirroring how Robin met Little John in the old legends. Humbled by the attack, Rob offers Knuckles a chance to join his crusade, and we cut back to the castle cells, where Sonic takes a moment to catch Ynar and the audience up on why he's hanging from a wall when he looked perfectly fine the last time we saw him. Turns out that he and Tails decided to try flying through that big storm that blew by during the start of the Day of Fury, even though they were safe in a cave when that was happening before, and their plane was struck by a stray bolt of lightning. Tails manages to land them, but the plane's damaged and they're too dizzy to fight back when the sheriff's men come and find them, mistaking Sonic for Rob, who is of course a wanted man around these parts. Ynar also lets us know that while he's been locked up, the rest of the tribe is being forced to do manual labor. Before Ynar can launch into an explanation as to why his people aren't on the floating island, the guards return, getting ready to take Sonic for interrogation, still believing him to be Rob. Ynar takes the opportunity to jump one of the guards and swipe the keys from him, though the 2 of them easily overpower him and decide to take him instead. Ynar somehow manages to toss Sonic the keys despite having his arms grabbed, and without the guards noticing, and Sonic manages to finagle them into his manacles to free himself. We jump back to Knuckles and Rob, who tells Knuckles that the sheriff is Robotnik's sub-boss from Mercia, and pretty much everyone who was acting as the area's freedom fighters were captured and roboticized. While he doesn't know where Knuckles' tribe is, he thinks they might be able to see them from the treetops, which they are, discovering that the tribe is being used as slave labor to clear-cut the forest. Knuckles, for some weird reason, just now decides to say he's accepting responsibility for the tribe, though I thought he'd already done that when he started leading them before, and decides to leap down there and free them, with Rob offering to accompany him. Meanwhile, the guards return to take Sonic, but now that he's freed of his manacles, he easily takes them down and then rushes off to find Tails, finding him on a rack being tickle-tortured for information by the sheriff. Sonic recognizes him as being none other than General Decollette, Antoine's father, someone who Sonic remembers as dying in the fight against Robotnik. He jumps down, knocking away the sheriff and his crony, freeing Tails from the rack before trying to appeal to the sheriff as the general, but he's still deeply entrenched in whatever mind control the Robians were initially under, despite Robotnik being long gone at this point, He goes after Sonic with an axe and a sword, but Sonic, concerned that he might legitimately be sick in the head, doesn't want to attack him. So, Tails decides to take the initiative and drops a damn chandelier on him before he can call any sort of reinforcements. The two of them run off to try and find an exit to the palace, and we cut to Rob and Knuckles, crossing yet another fallen tree bridge to head over to the tribe, and are stopped by a stranger on the bridge, and while Knuckles thinks he recognizes them from somewhere, Rob attempts to accost them and gets knocked off the bridge a second time for his trouble. Turns out the stranger is Mari Ann, who Knuckles helpfully tells us is actually part of the Lost Tribe, something that wasn't really made clear in the last issue, and as such made me believe that she just lived in Mercia, so sorry about that. But she really did just pop up without any sort of proper introduction or even appearing in the background shots with the other echidnas, so you can't really blame me. She and Rob immediately start crushing on each other, though Knuckles is quick to break up their making goo-goo eyes at one another as he spots Sonic and Tails' plane off in the distance. Rob states that the trail from the plane points in the direction of the sheriff's castle, which just so happens to be where we jump to next. Sonic and Tails are still rushing around from room to room, unable to make heads or tails of the castle's layout, though Sonic's able to trip up most of the robots that come looking for them. Back with Knuckles and friends, Rob leads them into a chapel near the castle that has a secret passage into said castle, and wouldn't you know it, when they get out of that tunnel, they just happen to run smack dab into Sonic and Tails. Turns out that Rob and Sonic know each other, or at least tangentially, as Rob is Amy's cousin, and he sent her to Knothole to keep her safe. Before Sonic can continue asking about that, they run out onto the balcony just in time to see Yanar out in the village square, a noose around his neck, about to be hanged. Well, that's a pretty dark image. We'll just ignore the fact that the sheriff is out there too, even though he was flattened under a chandelier before. This story is a lot better than the last two issues we covered, believe it or not. Well, I'd say it's just average in terms of overall storytelling. The story is straightforward, relatively easy to follow, and there are some decent lore bits in there. The whole Robin Hood parody angle is interesting, and at least makes a bit more sense here than the Monkey King homage we got with Monkey Khan. And I like Mercia as a location in this world. Rob and Marianne, unfortunately, don't make much in the way of a good impression, with Mari just sort of being there, and Rob being portrayed as rather hapless and in over his head. So it doesn't even follow Ken's usual MO of making his new characters introduced super overpowered for one initial story and then fading them into the background, which makes him look pretty pathetic as a character. Kudos for actually giving us someone related to Amy Rose, though. That is a nice touch. And the revelation of Antoine's father as the villain is surprising, to say the least. Really, the big issue I take with this story is once again the style with which it's told. We're once again flipping back and forth between two simultaneous stories, but with the breaks so quick and frequent that it takes me out of the story. At most, we get 2 pages dedicated to a single story, but most of the time it's 1 page or even less, and it's very distracting. Especially when a few of these scenes could have been more easily sewn together, and been let to run a little bit longer. It is very much an in-between issue, but at the very least it was much more straightforward. No mysteries, no mystic BS, no having to slog through piles of dialogue to make sense of everything. We're just in a straight-up adventure tale right now, and while it could be told better, it is competent. Art-wise, it's fairly well done again. Manigaland pencils while Jim Amash inks, and they do a solid job on this issue. Everything looks pretty good, and the design they give to the sheriff and his cronies is also fairly good too. The castle backgrounds are also really well done. But surprise surprise, we have Ken taking on another art duty this time, as the colorist of this issue. Well, it's not as bad as his pencils, that's for sure. His coloring style is very basic. There's very little separation between the light and shadow on most characters, and at times, his use of gradients, particularly on the eyes, is distractingly odd. But it's not a terrible job. I dare say if he wanted to pursue art further, developing his skills in that regard might have been a lot better than him being a penciler or an inker. But let's move on before I'm too positive about this. We do have a backup story to look at here, which I'm going to guess has the exact same team on it since I couldn't find any specific differing credits for the book itself. And hoop boy, while the main book might have been free of mumbo-jumbo, I guess Ken really couldn't help himself here. We open on King Max talking with Dr. Quack, who is amazed to see that the king is as healthy and fit as he is, given all the physical and mental trauma he's been going through over the past couple of years. The king tells him there is a reason, and that reason is the source of all. Oh boy. So the king explains that the Acorn Royal line has a hidden pool of silver and gold liquid known as the source of all. And every child of the line immerses themselves in the pool, bonding themselves to it. The liquid that bonds to their bodies is then used to forge their sword and crown, which acts as their link to the source. And what exactly is the source? Well, if the name didn't give it away, and I don't see how it would, it is basically the primordial soup of this world. A cosmic mixture of molecules that is the source of all life in the world, and is apparently also semi-sentient and has the ability of precognition, able to see the future. Linked to it as it was, the king, like all kings before him, are able to use the source of all as a power of knowledge. In other words, it's complete and utter bullshit. The king goes on to say that as the sword and the crown are his link to the main source, it sent him a precognition after Robotnik started his coup, but not before, and he has the sword taken and hidden by Rosie and Julela to be hidden away. And without its mate, the crown hid itself in the king's mind and cut off his connection to the source, which is why Nogus's magic was able to affect him so powerfully. He ends it by saying that now that he's in touch with the source again, things cannot continue as they are, regardless of whether his daughter wishes it were so. Well, that doesn't bode well. Also, I hate this story. Well, okay, the story itself is fine, actually letting us see the king when he's in a decently normal headspace. But a majority of it is one giant exposition dump, as per usual, for a story device that is, much like the Soul Touch, confusing at best and downright troubling at worst. The source of all is gonna get talked up to be a pretty damn big deal from here on out. How it's allegedly one of the most powerful things on the planet. How it can give those who are linked to it future sight and other enhancements like being able to drive away dark magic. But it is never consistent, and it is never shown to be even the slightest bit practical or helpful. It certainly didn't help when the kingdom was torn apart from the inside out. And when someone actually does question the source itself, the excuse of it works in mysterious ways is tossed about quite a bit, which is stupid on a lot of levels. If we're to believe what the king says about this thing, it knew the war was going to happen. It knows everything, allegedly, but it tells nothing. And we never get a feel for exactly what it does for those it's bonded with, other than, I guess, protection from magical ills. It's a lot like the Soul Touch, in that it's basically there to have a convenient Deus Ex explanation for why certain things happen. Want to get two characters together without worrying about things like compatibility, or chemistry, or courtship, or anything like that? Magical pseudoscience bullpocky about being drawn together by the threads of fate. Need a convenient way to justify why a king does bad things or ignores others? Link him to an allegedly mystical pot of bubbling piss. Look, having mystical artifacts or powers is fine in stories, but they have to have a reason for being there. They have to have limits and consistencies, and they shouldn't be used to just force certain aspects of a story, especially a romance, or to exist as a convenient way to explain away odd decisions by your characters, or conveniently fix things because you've written yourself into a corner. And yes, I fully acknowledge that a lot of those criticisms could be levied at the Chaos Emeralds themselves. They aren't a perfect example of this writing trope either, but compared to the unsettling implications of the Soul Touch and the downright bizarre implementation of the Source of All, they seem pretty tame and quaint by comparison. I'm glad I got that out of my system. We're gonna wrap this story up next time when we take a deep dive into Knuckles the Echidna, issue 12. I'll see you next time, everyone.